to the Soccer Chaplains United podcast, From the Touchline. And now, here's your host, Rev Brad.
Hey friends, if you've been tracking with us the last few podcasts, it's been about the Fourth Global Congress that happened in Waco, Texas a few weeks ago. And I've had a few guests on, I've shared my presentation, and today what I thought I would do is just share with you some of my own final thoughts on kind of this epic or recurring global congress that keeps happening every 3 years. And, the question that I asked Roger Leip and Kim Beach the past couple of weeks, I've asked them three questions, really, and I've said, hey, what was a favorite session of yours? Where do you see sports chaplaincy, soccer chaplaincy, maybe specifically? Where do you see that headed in the future? And then what's a main takeaway that you will take away from this Congress? And so today, what I want to do is share with you, kind of go through my notes in a kind of an overview fashion, just really quick, and kind of share with you some of the highlights for me, some of my favorite sessions. I know I've shared or spoken a little bit about them in the podcast with Roger and Kim already, but I want to hone in on a few things that I haven't maybe spoken about. And then I want to kind of give not a state of chaplaincy, but a state of the union kind of thing, but where I do think chaplaincy in sport is headed, and some of the themes and some of the larger brushstrokes that I see, some of the challenges that I see and experiencing on a day-to-day, weekly basis. And then another takeaway, just one more takeaway from me that kind of highlights maybe a little bit of what I'm looking forward to in the next Congress. I don't know. We'll see when we get there. I am much less scripted out for this podcast, so bear with me. It's not as polished and refined, and I thought I just want to be transparent, open, vulnerable, off the cuff a little bit more, which isn't my style. Those of you that know me, I'm much more prepared, or like to pretend that I'm prepared. So let me talk through a few highlights for me through this Congress. One was, the first session, one of the first sessions I went to was a student of mine, Carrie Amon. And Carrie did a presentation on what she called the Elite Recovery Program, involving spiritual care as part of a recovery process for maybe an athlete who's been injured or hurt. And I think a highlight for me was seeing a number of students. Some of you will know that I teach as an adjunct with Baylor's Truett Seminary, and I've taught soul care and sports class for 2 sessions now over the past 4 years. And it was really neat to see students at the Congress. I had encouraged attendance, but I know Paul Putz and others through Baylor had encouraged as well. But it was really neat to see them there, to see them contributing, to see them growing, mature. Now, a couple of the FCA guys came up to me, and my back was turned. I remember I was collecting some food for one of the meals, and they were like, "Is that Rev Brad?" And it kind of gave me a hard time, or we're joking around. It was just, it's when you engage with people that you've been on a journey of learning with. That for me was one of the highlights of this Congress, and to see them contributing, to see them engage, to see them even coming in and saying, "I want to still learn." Even though some of these students have high level positions at certain Christian ministry and organizations, they're not laying it aside and saying, "I can't still grow and learn and even contribute." And I really loved what Carrie was doing, because she's practically thinking, how can we integrate faith, spirituality better into a recovery process for athletes and for people that are going through this? And I thought, wow, it's really a great contribution from her. Another thing that I enjoy out of the Congress, so one is students, former students, current students, seeing them. A second one is seeing the integration of other ideas that I've had, I like, I enjoy, I've seen, but I just don't have the time to do. So as an example, one of the other presentations in the same hour even as Carrie's presentation was on social work. And, I see more and more in soccer, in Major League Soccer, you see the development of a player care, player support person, and it functionally is like a social worker. But to have that social work element as someone who says, right, you've come into this community, this team, this country, let us help you with managing all the details that you won't know and understand and get. This is where you go for a driver's license. This is how you file paperwork for this. This is what an HOA, like here are the different things that you may not have experienced elsewhere in the world as you've traveled the game, or you're a young person. So let's just give you additional support because maybe mom and dad and other kind of similar familiar resources aren't available. And so this presentation on how do we bring alongside the aspect, the work of social work alongside athletes and athletics, again, is one of those places where you come to a Congress like this and you go, yes, that's a good idea. And my time as a chaplain in hospice, we had an interdisciplinary team. I know it's called other things elsewhere in the world, but in seeing the chaplain with the social worker, with the nurse, with the doctor, with the volunteer activities person, like all of us working together toward a patient-centered, holistic person overview of care, I think is applicable to sport. Of course, we're SoccrChapUtd United. We're not soccer, or we're not United Social Workers of Soccer or anything like that. So, there's a limit, there's a boundary to what we can do ourselves, but we can encourage. We can encourage best practice and promote it and say like, hey, what about having these aspects around our athletes in sport? Now, that's growing in soccer. I don't know where it is in other places with other sports. I do know that sometimes high-level athletes will have a personal assistant that takes care of some of those things for them. That functionally could serve in some of those ways. But again, seeing those ideas come to light, seeing those practices begin to be employed and implemented around sport, and seeing someone at a Congress giving a presentation and advocating for it more is certainly an encouragement as well. I think a third thing as I go through my notes is meeting kindred spirits. So John Levis is a chaplain, volunteer chaplain with Philadelphia Union with the second team. And it was my first time to meet John. But John's a kindred spirit, I feel. And his presentation, he talked about C.S. Lewis connecting it more into faith, sport, integration. And I love this line that he drew out of Lewis: to be holy at the lowest level must be fun. And I think that there's a way in which as we, and I do this a lot with the athletes I work with, is I love C.S. Lewis. I love other writers like Bonhoeffer. I'm just looking at some of my books in my library. And when you read a great author, when you read the biblical text, and the power that it has to bring life, to redeem, to restore, to rebuild, you want to bring those things into the people that you interact with. And I love how, as John shared, he talked through just these principles from Scripture and principles from reading C.S. Lewis that were integrative or are integrative when it comes to the athlete. And I just think, like, at these congresses, some of this little sidebar here, if you're a chaplain listening, if you're a person in sport, you're an athletic director, you're an executive somehow, I just think you can go to places, and I'm sure these happen with TED Talks and other kind of industry-related conferences, but when you meet someone that has a kindred spirit that's faith-related, not just conceptually related, it really stirs and moves the soul. Well, moving on, there's always the controversial, I find, even at these congresses. There's the controversial where a concept is presented that maybe you've not thought of. And, and sometimes for towards a positive bent, or maybe sometimes it's looking at something that's a negative influencer on sport. So I went to a session on sports gambling, and we talk about how gambling, the challenge of it that it presents for the sports fan, and how we maybe need to combat that a little bit differently. I've shared with a few and at different times that a lot of the athletes I work with technically can't gamble on the game. They can't make a wager, place a wager on most sports. They can't bet on themselves, and it's wrong if they influence the game anyway. There's strict rules against that. But I still find that amongst elite athletes, elite performers, there's often betting that happens all the time around maybe a golf game that they're playing against their teammates, or hey, I'm gonna perform 100 juggles, and there's these competitive things that end up usually in a wager. I'm going to hit the crossbar. We're going to have a crossbar challenge, and there's a wager associated with it. So there's a lot of ways in which maybe gambling itself doesn't influence the elite athletes I work with, because there's rules, laws, restrictions against that. But you see still the pattern, the habits, and the behaviors. And so how do we address those things? How do we address those things from a faith-centered perspective? How do we address those things with a boldness, a prophetic voice? That's some of what happens. I asked a question in this one session on sports gambling. I asked, is fantasy football, talking about the American kind of online American football thing, is it a gateway drug to gambling? And the presenter agreed with me. He thought it could be because of the way it fulfilled. He kind of gave these 4 criteria for what gambling is and does, and it struck me that maybe fantasy football is, or some of these fantasy sports where we choose our lineups and we make friendly wagers with friends, or sometimes people play for money. Those kinds of things can lead us into a deeper place of having a gambling addiction or struggle. Another controversial, I'd put it in the controversial camp a little bit, is a presentation on the morality of martial arts. What an interesting title, right? Sometimes we think, especially when we look at combat fighting, there are real concerns that come against, here we are engaged in fighting, in battle. We're fighting, we're marring the image of God. Where is that ethically, morally, spiritually? How do we handle? How do we have these conversations? And so this presentation more so was around looking at the beauty of martial arts, looking at it as a form of expression rather than trying to earn money or win or gain promotion or entertain. Martial arts has a self-discipline aspect. It has learning. It has, and so I just thought how wonderful, because sometimes I think we look at things like violence, and we look at martial arts, maybe through our Hollywood eyes, and we go, yeah, is that right? Can I enjoy this? Should I be entertained by this? Bruce Lee, it was a brilliant martial arts person, and maybe we look at his acting and martial arts skills, and there's a beauty to it, something that we enjoy. And but we also see too that God doesn't love violence. He doesn't want violence. He doesn't promote violence. He doesn't want his name associated with violence. And so what do we do with martial arts? What do we do with other combat sports? And how do we engage in these things? Now, these presentations are 15 minutes. So you're presenting an idea, and sometimes you don't have a full amount of time to really process through and think through what this might look like, or what this needs to look like for the Christian person, the Christian athlete. And again, but what I love about the Congress is it raises the question. It raises the question in such a way that walking away, and I've only got simple notes here, right? But I have a note here that says, Jacob gets a blessing after wrestling with God. Ooh, what do I do with that? I have to think through that. Now, Jacob also walked around with a limp for the rest of his life too because of that. So when we look at a biblical text and we maybe use it as a support structure for an argument or a case that we want to make, are we doing the rigid, rigorous work of making sure that we're understanding the text rightly, applying it rightly, and can we see some true applications to the sport, to the thing that we're into. And so I love that aspect of the Congress because it's always challenging me, and I walk away thinking, wow, that was a new thing. I hadn't thought about those kinds of things before. Another one kind of in the controversial camp is a couple of the sessions dealt with things like Christian nationalism. Where does that fit into the sports landscape? One presenter talked about creating more space for LGBTQ plus athletes and chaplains. So here's a apply to say, hey, look, this segment of our athlete audience, culture, demographic, if you will, has grown, and so we need chaplains of the same ilk, of the same cut from the same cloth, so to speak, is what this one person was presenting. And so in presenting that's super controversial. And how do we navigate? And again, in 15 minutes and then some Q&A after, you can't really get into the depths of things. You're just kind of presenting an idea and having to support it, and then walk away with how do we apply this? Do we apply this? And so I'll speak a little bit more to that as we get into as I talk a little bit more about the future of sports chaplaincy and soccer chaplaincy in general. But there are things we see in TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, all the socials, where we sometimes are left to wonder, is this true? Is this really how it is? I've for a while, I've seen a lot of things crop up on my feed about Caitlin Clark and the WNBA. One of the presenters talked about how the WNBA has become really an activist kind of league, and how do we promote, carry, hold a faithful activism? What an interesting idea. But again, too, I think walking away from that session, I felt in some ways, aren't women being exploited yet again for a stage, for a platform, by people who have more money, more resources, and tons of agenda? And for me, maybe for others, hasn't the sport itself become sullied because you have these strong activist moments, these strong agendas, and it puts a sour taste in your mouth where you either watch it for not for the praiseworthiness of the sport and God's gift of athleticism to people, but you're watching it for the controversy and drama and the old wives' tale, so to speak. And so, thinking through that, I'm thinking through Paul's admonition to Timothy, but don't be caught up in what the world gets caught up in. And I just think, now, I might not have it right. I don't watch the NBA very much, or WNBA, excuse me. And I think, but in seeing some of these things, I've wondered, would I enjoy this? Because it seems like people are more concerned with the drama of the players on the court and the things that they're about or not about than they are the actual game itself. And that to me feels like it diminishes the beauty maybe of the game. I've mentioned some of the people that you meet at this Congress is amazing, and you meet new people, which is exciting because you can meet a kindred spirit, you can meet someone else working in the space, as I've mentioned John before, and then you can just meet people who maybe are taking on or tackling on something that is keen interest that's kind of down the road. And one of the sessions I remember, I believe it was Tracy Trothan, was talking about the enhanced games coming to Las Vegas in 2026. So I don't know if you've heard about these enhanced games, but in the enhanced games, athletes will actually be encouraged to find the limits of human performance without restriction, except for where it has to do with preserving or protecting life. Okay, so as an example, anabolic steroids will be encouraged. And having medical staff and others to make sure that no one's like pushing the limits so far that they die. But let's push the limits as far as we can. And whether we're using AI enhancements or we're using anabolic steroids or other kind of things, other drugs or other performance enhancers, we want to do that because we want to see, can we push the limits? And so what they've said is in the enhanced games, if you break a world record, guaranteed $1 million. So think about the high jump. I don't know what the high jump record is right now. And of course, the sport, there's always concerns about doping and et cetera. But if an athlete can break the Olympic high jump record or the world record for the high jump, they'll be given $1 million. And now in the enhanced games, you've set a new record, enhanced record, and that will be broken in some other time. And how do we do that? And so there's this push, and it shows you where sport is headed. It shows you in some ways where our world is pushing. We want to push the bounds of our human capacity, our human ability. And I think there's a curiosity for me in that. I think too that there's a little bit of sense of wariness, caution, danger. Can we do this? Can we do this well? Because it feels like we're moving really fast toward this thing. And so, again, but these kinds of things are coming up at the Congress. And I think that they are pushing me and they're pushing others to think more deeply and to think more clearly about what sport looks like now and what it's going to look like in the future. Well, hey, friends, I've been talking for a little bit. I want to take a break, and then we'll come back right after this. Hi, I'm Rev Brad Kenney. I wrote the Soccer Psalms to help people reconnect with God's Word by seeing how the beautiful game reflects the truths of Scripture. Inside the book, you'll find 31 Psalms, one for each day of the month. They're short reflections that link soccer's moments of joy, struggle, and teamwork with the timeless story of God's love. And whether you call it soccer or football, this book is for you. It's available worldwide on Amazon as the Soccer Psalms, the Football Psalms in British English, and even Los Salmos del Fútbol in Spanish. So before the next kickoff, take a moment to discover how the game we love can point us back to God's Word and the one who gave us both. Well, just still looking at my notes, and I feel like I have not gotten through very much of the Congress itself, but I do have a few more things, just highlights of favorite sessions. And these are the sessions that I attended. It felt like I didn't get to see a number of people at the Congress that I might have liked to or hear their sessions because there was just so much to choose from. And so I just want to share a few more. One thing I love is, there's the weaving at times of like a C.S. Lewis writer. There's a weaving of, one gal made a weaving talking about physical activity and health, but looking at it from a agrarian perspective, a farmer's perspective. So she took different aspects, quantifiable aspects of farm life and put it toward physical activity and health data. And I just thought, what an interesting thing is to look at the pattern of U.S. farming and to find parallels within sport. And again, just where I sit as a chaplain, in leading a sport-based, soccer-based chaplain ministry, there always has to be translation work. Where do I see God at work? And how can I make application and reference to his work into the lives of the people that I serve, whether they're an athlete, a coach, a staff member, it doesn't matter. I have sitting in my office, a window space, I have a little transformer from my air conditioner from this past year that went out. And that led me to talking about God's Word transforming our lives. And what does a transformer do? I have to go look, what does this little box thing do? How does it, mediate energy and channel and change and distribute, and how does it transform is what I had to do. And then, but it made some great lessons and parallels for in some of the moments this season for some of the people that I was working with. And so what I love is I love seeing the creativity of this person, Christy Vietato, who talked about this farming perspective. Another one that was really great I found was this thing called Storyball. So we probably have heard of Moneyball, right? But Storyball is this idea of how do we use storytelling as a vehicle for understanding ourselves and our performance. And I just, as I listened to this person, this person was a golf pro in Michigan, and he's written a few books, a couple books on golf, and so this idea of Storyball, I thought it almost feels like this could be a coaching movement. Is you could create in what he presented about Storyball and the concept, you could almost create a coaching movement where you train up others in the Storyball method, and you get them to increase, or it helps their performance because of the way that we engage storytelling, our own story, other stories, and stories we know about in our culture and in the modern marketplace as well. It's always great to see old friends too. Nick Watson, Andrew Parker, Stephen Waller, Warren Evans, Stephen Jones. Like there's so many that you see them, you meet with them. Matt Baker is another one. Matt's in I'm in a similar role to what he's had for many years with Sports Chaplaincy UK. He's led up the English Premier League football chaplaincy development. And so when you see old friends and you've got a lot to catch up on, and you see them too presenting, it's always great to hear, maybe some familiar things. I think Warren's presentation, I've heard before, like different, updated, certainly, and maybe it's just Warren and Warren's personality, but sometimes you need that too. You need the familiarity to reground you in something that you already believe about yourself, but maybe you've gotten away from yourself in a way, or maybe you've become discouraged or you don't understand. I loved too. There's a few people that always push the envelope a little bit with the Congress, and one asking the question in their presentation title, "Fit for what?" What are we being fit for? And really did an excellent job. This was really a Catholic, I believe, priest that was presenting a Christian theology of like, how do we understand our bodies? How are we to understand our bodies? Like, what do we see, and where do we see Jesus doing this? Jesus walked a lot, when we talk 10,000 steps and staying fit for our lives, we might be able to look at Jesus and the pattern of walking that he did in terms of doing ministry and other things. And I just loved sort of the integration that so many of these presentations give. And then, again, I think sometimes I think about my own presentation and I struggle because I'm this wannabe academic. I'm certainly a strong practitioner, and I feel caught in the middle somehow. Like, Kim mentioned this, Roger mentioned this as well in the previous podcast, is that the Congress itself is really a collection of practitioners and academics. But what has happened over the last 12 years in the four Congresses that have happened, or when did we start? Was it? Anyway, I think it was 2016. So yeah, maybe 10 years, 9 years. What you've seen though is you see these lines blurring a little bit. Some of the academics are becoming more practicing, and some of the practitioners are becoming more academic. Although I didn't feel much more academic in my presentation. I felt I was landing very much in the practitioner side of the translation and doing the soccer psalms talk. But that's been a beautiful blend, is to see how the Congress has grown over the years. And you have, again, the voices that push, the voices that challenge, the voices that bring a new or different idea. And then you have the familiar voices that keep us continuing to roll and continuing to go. And so I've just really enjoyed that. So let me talk for a minute real quick about the future of sports chaplaincy, the future of soccer chaplaincy as I see it. Certainly, there are things changing in the realm of sport that I don't know we have answers for today, but we need to begin thinking of them. The enhanced games, to me, becomes one of those places where we have to deal with a new set of, or a new challenge to our ethics and morality. And I don't know that we've done it or gotten it really well for the sport that currently exists. Now we're adding another layer of consideration. So let me give an example of what I mean. Within soccer specifically, guys, I can speak to that, I think, a little bit better than other sport. There are some cultural rules or there's some norms that are accepted that maybe we would say as Christian people, we could question, should this be accepted? So here's an example. When the ball goes out of play and it goes off, two players are going for a 50-50 ball. Maybe you as a casual fan and observer, you don't see who the ball necessarily went out on, right? That's for the center official and the sideline referees, the flags people to wave up and to show like whose possession it is. Sometimes we can't see it in real time. It's difficult. But what players are taught to do is to raise their hand. The ball is mine. It's mine. It went off this other person. Well, the question is that lying? Does that go against God's command not to lie? And I think you could ask many athletes, I'll say, who will say, this is just a part of the game. This is just part of the game. This is what we all do. And we all know time wasting is another one. When your team is ahead and there's just minutes left and you take extra time to go get the ball, to get a drink of water, like to do all the little things, right? There's this, and everybody gets frustrated with it, but everyone gets it. Like this is just part of the game is kind of the attitude. And so when we take an attitude where we arrive at normalizing something that actually goes against the beauty or the spirit of the game, whatever game it is, and we've normalized it and said, it's acceptable. You know, we think about maybe a flagrant foul in basketball. We think about the way that a team may take a certain kind of penalty in the game because it will actually be towards their advantage to take the penalty. Those kinds of things, right? We have to deal with on a moral level. There are ways in which our faith, we have to answer and address certain questions. But now you add in something like the enhanced games where we're adding in a different layer of morality and ethics, or we're adding in different questions, and we still haven't gotten it right with, just normalized sport. That becomes a challenge, I think. And that's going to be a challenge for Christian people, whether you're a chaplain, you're a Christian athlete, you're a Christian participant in some way, an official, a coach, an executive somehow. These things will become more front and center to the question of, ought we to do this? Should we do this way? How does our faith inform the way that we participate, withdraw, engage, not engage, and all the things? So I think that's one place where we're headed in terms of a general overall view of sports chaplaincy. A second thing where I think we're headed, although, again, check my prophetic gifts at the door, I don't know, but soccer itself tends to be, just like other sport, often it feels like it's hijacked by different ideological agendas. What do I mean by that? If you go to an MLS game, if you go to an NWSL game, the top tier leagues here in the States, you will see a plethora of flags, banners, ideologies represented oftentimes inside the stadium that are not football related. They're not soccer related. And, I mentioned the WNBA earlier, and it seems like there's, this has become, or at least by this presenter, was entitled an activist league. I think in many ways, too, that soccer has become that. I think soccer, in the States especially, is trying to be, in some ways, all things to all people or most people. And if we really think about it, if we zoom out and we take the 30,000-foot view, it's always about money. And it's very rarely about whatever virtue is being signaled. Yes, there are good things that are being done by soccer teams, organizations within the community. Yes, there are people, marginalized, minority, and others that sometimes are being helped, oftentimes receive some sort of help from the game itself. But if we're really honest with ourselves, it comes down to money. And when those things feel like to those that control those spaces, it could be profitable for them, or it might do something to lessen certain damages. That's when we see things put into place. And I think what that means for us in terms of soccer chaplaincy specifically, we have a greater challenge as chaplains. Where is the prophetic voice? This is a challenge I wake up with and deal with at least a few times in a week. How do I deal with the call on my life prophetically to speak into the darkness, to speak against evil, to speak against wrongdoing that is seen, observed, known, and even the things unknown? Recently, I was preparing for an upcoming event, and the concept of Ezekiel in Scripture being the watchman for Israel is something I'm just relearning, re-getting into. I've kind of read and studied a little bit about Ezekiel's role, but that prophetic role that he has, God tells him, look, for the watchman, if he sees the danger coming and stays silent, then the trouble will also befall him. If the watchman sees the trouble coming and warns and the people do nothing, it's on them. If the watchman sees the trouble coming, warns, and these other things happen, the accountability that God puts, just to say there's a very heavy and complex level of accountability that comes to the watchman. And I think in some ways, when we think about what a sports chaplain is and does, what a soccer chaplain is and does, I think we just think, oh, well, they show up and they pray with the Christian athletes. That's what they do. Oh, that's nice. That's pretty. That's beautiful. Let's put that on a fundraising card and have a dinner and have people over and give money towards this work. But the work of a chaplain, oftentimes in the pastoral role, there's a prophetic role as well. And I think that many times, and I'll just confess this for myself, a challenge is I tend to go silent because I don't want to lose the opportunity, the ability to be, as a guest at the club that I serve, I might shy away from a prophetic moment to speak into something that's wrong because I'm afraid. And what God is saying to Ezekiel is, it's going to be on you. If I've told you to speak, if I've shown you the danger and you don't warn, it's on you. And you will face judgment, no matter how righteous you are. Well, friends, I don't think that, if I shared that message with my chaplain colleagues, both with Soccer Chaplains United and in the broader space of the sport itself and others, I don't know how well that would be received. Because I think we often, I've heard language like, yeah, we just need to be behind the scenes. We just need to be, stay quiet. We need to stay back. We're in the background. We are in the background. The game is not about us. We're there to support people, support athletes, coaches, staff members. But there's an aspect to our role that we can't ignore, and I think has been ignored. And so I think, and maybe again, this is just for me, this is what I intuit and feel, there may come a day for me where I cannot let the prophetic voice be silent, and I have to say something. I have to speak up. And I'm not talking about sort of the ills and the wrongdoing that our culture has said, hey, you have to speak up on these things. I'm not talking about sexual harassment, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, those verbal abuse, those things that there's a little bit of training and a little bit of the world is saying, yeah, we shouldn't do that. I'm talking about some of the deeper, darker evils as we become aware of them, as we see them, as God, tells us we need to give that warning. I think that's going to be a challenge. Well, wow. I thought this was going to be a short podcast today because I didn't, maybe I'm just long-winded or whatever. But I think for me, finally, is what I want to share is a takeaway from the Congress is I'm going to the next one. I'm going to the next one. I think very simply, unless God says, hey, Brad, you're done in sport, you're done in soccer, being a soccer chaplain in the next 3 years. And that could happen. You know, he might say, look, I want you to go into church ministry and give all this up. I don't know why he would do that, but he may. If I'm still in sport, still doing soccer chaplaincy and leading Soccer Chaplains United, I will highlight, get ready for, and make Vancouver, BC, October 2028. Part of my budget, part of my thing that I'm doing. I just think the value of going to these congresses, I've seen now 4 times over. And I think that it's important for giving continuity for where we serve. It's important for giving encouragement and insight into the future of where we may serve. And I think it's too good to look back. And as what I've tried to do today is just looking back over some notes, looking back over what some people have presented, to be encouraged, to say, let's keep going on and let's continue to strive to do our best, to do what we can well for God's glory, for His kingdom. Well, friends, thanks again for joining me, and look forward to, again, next month, we'll have a totally different theme for the podcast, but looking forward to it. And thank you again for joining me. Bless you this week in whatever game you have or training session, and we'll speak again soon.